Their love story was built on a foundation of healing, trust, and mutual respect. David proposed on the anniversary of Madison's rescue, not as a reminder of her trauma, but as a celebration of her strength. "You saved yourself," he told her. "Steve just helped you realize you were worth saving." 2 words from a 12-year-old Ukrainian orphan stopped Steve Harvey mid-sentence and changed Family Feud history forever. But it wasn't what he said that broke the studio. It was how he said it, when he said it, and the devastating truth behind why these 2 boys had been keeping their deepest feelings secret for months. The moment those words left his lips, Steve dropped his cards. The audience gasped, and something happened that no game show had ever witnessed before. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, love, and the power of second chances. Because sometimes, the most profound moments happen when the cameras are rolling, but everyone forgets they're on television. Let me take you back to what happened before those 2 words shattered everyone in that Atlanta studio. It was a crisp Thursday morning at the Family Feud studios. Steve Harvey was preparing for what he thought would be another routine taping when his assistant knocked on his dressing room door. "Steve," she said quietly, "there's been a special request for today's show. 2 of your boys want to be part of the audience." The boys she was referring to were Dmitri and Alexei Petrov, 2 12-year-old Ukrainian brothers whom Steve had adopted 6 months earlier. Their story was one that had gripped Steve's heart from the moment he first heard it. Their parents had been killed in a missile strike on their apartment building in Kharkiv during the early days of the Russian invasion. Through a refugee assistance program and months of complicated paperwork, Steve had brought them to America and into his home. But here's what nobody knew. Steve Harvey had been searching for these boys specifically. When he first saw their faces on a refugee assistance website, something inside him shifted completely. There was something about their eyes, their protective stance as they held each other, that reminded him of his own childhood struggles. Steve's face lit up immediately. "Of course they can be here. Set them up in the front row where I can see them." What Steve didn't know was that the boys had been planning something for weeks, something they had been working on in secret, practicing their English pronunciation late at night, whispering to each other about their plan to surprise the man who had given them a new life. They had filled an entire notebook with English phrases, crossed out words, rewritten sentences, all building toward this moment. The truth about their arrival in America was more complicated than anyone realized. The boys had actually been placed with another family first, a well-meaning couple from Chicago who wanted to help but couldn't bridge the cultural and emotional gap. After just 3 weeks, when the boys were found crying themselves to sleep every night, social services had to find them a new placement. That's when Steve Harvey stepped in, not for publicity, not for recognition, but because something about their story had awakened a paternal instinct he didn't even know he possessed. The show began normally. The competing families, the Rodriguez family from San Antonio and the Washington family from Detroit, took their positions. Steve worked his magic with the crowd, and the energy was electric as always. But in the front row, 2 small boys sat nervously, their hands clasped together, waiting for their moment. Dmitri, the older of the 2 by just 8 minutes, kept glancing at his brother Alexei. Both boys wore matching blue button-down shirts that Steve had bought them for special occasions, their first school picture day, their first visit to his church, and now this. Their hair was neatly combed. And despite their nervous energy, there was something remarkably brave about their posture. They sat like soldiers, backs straight, eyes focused. Steve noticed them immediately during his opening monologue. How could he not? They were his boys. But something about their expressions today was different, more serious, more determined. The game progressed through 2 rounds. Normally, Steve was in his element, making jokes, connecting with families, creating those magical moments that made Family Feud more than just a television show. The Rodriguez family had taken an early lead with some strong answers, and the energy in the studio was building toward what promised to be an exciting finish. But during the commercial break before the final round, something unexpected happened. Dmitri stood up from his seat in the front row. "Mr. Steve," he called out, his Ukrainian accent still thick despite months of intensive English lessons. The entire studio turned to look. Steve, who had been reviewing his cards, looked over with surprise. "Hey there, buddy. You boys doing okay?" But instead of the quick thumbs up he expected, instead of sitting back down, Dmitri walked toward the stage. His steps were measured, deliberate. This wasn't a child acting impulsively. This was someone on a mission. Security started to move toward the boy, but Steve held up his hand immediately. "It's okay, that's my son." The word son echoed through the studio, and crew members who knew Steve's story felt their hearts tighten. Some of them had been there the day Steve first brought the boys to the studio, had watched him patiently explain what Family Feud was, had seen him teach them the rules and help them practice buzzing in. Alexei quickly followed his brother, and soon, both boys were standing at the edge of the stage, looking up at Steve with an intensity that made everyone in the studio pay attention. The competing families, the audience, even the cameraman found themselves drawn into this unexpected moment. "Boys, what's going on?" Steve asked, kneeling down to their level as the cameras continued to roll. The producers in the booth were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, but something about the solemnity of the moment kept them rolling. Dmitri looked at Alexei, took a deep breath that seemed too big for his small chest, and began to speak. What came next was something no one in that studio was prepared for. "Mr. Steve," Dmitri began, his voice shaking but determined, "we have something to tell you, something we practiced for many weeks with Ms. Elena." Ms. Elena was their English tutor, a Ukrainian immigrant who had been helping them navigate their new language and culture. The studio audience was completely silent now. Even the production crew had stopped their usual between-takes chatter. Something about the boys' serious expressions and the weight in Dmitri's voice commanded everyone's attention. This felt important. This felt real. "Before we come to America," Dmitri continued, "when bombs were falling on our house in Kharkiv, when Mama and Papa," his voice broke slightly, and Alexei immediately reached over to squeeze his brother's hand, "when they died protecting us in basement, I promise Alexei something very important." Steve's expression had completely changed. The game show host persona had disappeared, replaced by something much more personal, much more raw. He could feel the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever the boys talked about their parents.
"I promise him that I will find us new Papa, someone who will love us like real Papa did, someone who will keep us together." Dmitri's English was careful, deliberate, each word chosen with the precision of someone who had been practicing this speech for weeks.
The audience was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't part of the show. This was life happening in real time. And then, Alexei spoke for the first time, his voice even smaller than his brother's, but carrying the same determined weight. "Then you found us in refugee center. You sit with us when we cry. You learn our real names, not just American names they give us." Steve remembered that day vividly. The boys had been given the names Danny and Alex by well-meaning volunteers who thought it would help them assimilate faster. But Steve had insisted on learning their real names, on understanding their story, on seeing them as complete human beings rather than charity cases. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, was completely speechless. His hands were resting on the boys' shoulders, and he could feel them trembling slightly. But the boys weren't finished. They had more to say, and they were going to say it all. "We want to tell you something," Dmitri said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. The paper was worn from handling, covered with careful handwriting in both Ukrainian and English. "We write this letter first in Ukrainian, then we translate to English with Miss Elena. We practice reading it every night before sleep." He unfolded the paper with shaking hands and began to read. "Dear Papa Steve, in Ukraine, we had very good Papa. His name was Volodymyr. Like President, he make us laugh every day. He teach us to play football. He keep us safe always. He love us and Mama very much. When war came, when bad men with tanks hurt our city, when they hurt our Mama and Papa, we think love is gone forever. We think family is finished." The audience was openly crying now. Several crew members had stopped what they were doing and were watching with tears streaming down their faces. The Rodriguez and Washington families were holding hands across the aisle, united in this moment that transcended competition. Alexei took the paper from his brother and continued reading, his small voice growing stronger with each word. But then you come to refugee place in Poland. You see us sitting alone, and you not walk away like other people. You sit with us on floor. You learn our names. You ask about our mom and papa. And when we cry, you cry too. You not try to stop our tears. You cry with us. Steve's hands were trembling slightly as he listened to these two boys pour their hearts out in front of millions of viewers. He remembered that day in the refugee center, how something about these two boys had reached into his chest and grabbed his heart. He had gone there as part of a charity visit, but he had left knowing his life was about to change forever. You take us to America on big airplane, Dmitri continued, taking the paper back. You give us your family name. You teach us English and Spanish and how to be American boys, but you never say we cannot miss Ukraine. You never say we cannot cry for mama and papa. You never try to make us forget. By now, the entire studio was in tears. The competing families on both sides had abandoned any pretense of being there for a game show. The Washington family patriarch, a grandfather himself, was openly sobbing. One of the Rodriguez daughters had her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. You buy us clothes and toys and video games, Alexei continued. But most important, you buy us time. Time to be sad. Time to remember. Time to heal. You patient when we have nightmares. You patient when we speak Ukrainian in our sleep. You patient when we are angry about everything. Steve was struggling to maintain his composure. These boys, who had endured unimaginable trauma, who had lost everything, were standing here thanking him for being patient with their pain. And now, Dmitri said, his voice growing stronger, now we want to tell you something. We never tell anyone, not Miss Elena, not Doctor, not even each other until we practice this speech. Both boys looked directly at Steve, their eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with something else, determination, love, gratitude, and a maturity that no 12-year-old should have to possess. In Ukraine, we dream sometimes that Papa Volodymyr come back. We dream he is not really dead, just hiding from bad men. We dream, Mama, waiting for us somewhere safe. Dmitri's voice was steady now, clear and strong, but we not dream anymore about going back to old life. You know why? Steve shook his head, not trusting his voice to respond. Because you not replacement papa, Alexei said clearly, his English suddenly perfect, as if the emotion had burned away any uncertainty. You not second papa? You not American papa? Instead of Ukrainian papa, you are real papa, different from Ukraine papa, but real. Our hearts have room for both. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive studio. Steve Harvey, who had comforted thousands of contestants, who had navigated every possible emotional situation a game show could throw at him, found himself completely undone by two small Ukrainian boys, speaking truth that cut straight to his soul. And then Alexei spoke the two words that would stop Steve Harvey in his tracks, the two words that would change everything. Thank you, Papa. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Steve Harvey, the master of quick comebacks and perfect timing, was rendered completely speechless. His face crumpled, and for the first time in his television career, he began to cry openly on camera. Steve reached out and pulled both boys into a hug that seemed to encompass not just them, but somehow their lost parents, their destroyed homeland, their painful journey, and their hopeful future, all at once. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion and barely above a whisper. Boys, I need you to know something. I may have given you a home, but you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. You taught me what it really means to be a father, not just a provider, not just a protector, but someone who loves unconditionally, who shows up every day, who chooses family over and over again. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't the typical game show applause. This was something deeper, more meaningful. This was 300 people witnessing a moment of pure, unguarded love. The applause went on for nearly 3 minutes, with people standing, crying, and clapping until their hands hurt. But Steve wasn't finished. Still holding the boys, he turned to address the entire studio, his voice now carrying the weight of everything he had learned in the past 6 months. Ladies and gentlemen, these boys lost everything. Their parents, their home, their country, their language, their entire world. But they didn't lose their capacity to love. They didn't lose their courage. They didn't lose their hope. They didn't lose their faith that somewhere out there, someone would choose to love them. He looked down at Dmitri and Alexei, both now crying but smiling at the same time, their faces radiant with relief and joy.
And they reminded me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up. It's about loving someone so completely that their pain becomes your pain, and their joy becomes your joy. It's about making room in your heart for love that comes from the most unexpected places.
The boys had prepared one more surprise. Dmitri reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small Ukrainian flag and a small American flag, carefully tied together with a blue and yellow ribbon that matched the colors of Ukraine. "This is for you, Papa," he said, handing the flags to Steve. "Ukraine heart, American home, family everywhere, love lives." What happened next broke every game show rule in television history. Steve Harvey made a decision that defied every producer's expectation, every network protocol, every consideration of ratings and advertising revenue. He turned to the production booth and said, "Stop the game. Stop everything. This family needs a moment that belongs to us, not to television." But something extraordinary happened. The cameras didn't stop. The producers, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment, kept rolling as Steve Harvey, 2 Ukrainian orphans, and an entire studio full of people shared a moment that would be talked about for years to come. The competing families came down from their podiums and surrounded Steve and the boys. The Rodriguez family grandmother reached out to hug Alexei. The Washington family father put his hand on Dmitri's head like a blessing. For nearly 10 minutes, the game show became something else entirely, a celebration of love, family, and the human capacity for healing. Later, the producers would reveal that this episode became the most watched Family Feud episode in the show's history. Not because of the game, which was never finished, but because viewers witnessed something increasingly rare in our world: pure, unconditional love in action, broadcast live to millions of homes. The segment raised over $3 million for Ukrainian refugee children in its first week alone. Dozens of families came forward to adopt Ukrainian war orphans. The U.S. State Department created a special fast-track adoption program for Ukrainian children. But perhaps most importantly, it reminded millions of viewers what family really means in a world that often seems divided by everything except love. Steve still keeps that folded piece of paper with the boys' speech in his jacket pocket during every taping. He's never read it on camera again, but crew members have seen him pull it out during commercial breaks just to remind himself of what really matters. Dmitri and Alexei, now thriving in American schools, but still proudly speaking Ukrainian at home, attend every Family Feud taping they can. They've become unofficial mascots of the show, and their presence reminds everyone involved that sometimes television can be about more than entertainment. The boys have started their own nonprofit organization, with Steve's help, called Hearts Without Borders. They help connect Ukrainian refugee children with American families, and their story has inspired countless other families to open their hearts and homes to children in need. And every year on the anniversary of that episode, Steve receives the same text message from both boys, sent from their shared phone. "Thank you for choosing us, Papa. Thank you for showing us that love has no borders. We love you forever." The lesson that 2 12-year-old Ukrainian boys taught a television studio, a game show host, and millions of viewers is simple but profound. Love has no nationality. Family has no borders, and sometimes the most powerful word in any language spoken by the smallest voices can change everything. Today, Dmitri and Alexei are thriving 13-year-olds who speak perfect English but haven't forgotten their Ukrainian roots. They help Steve with his charity work for refugee children, and their story has inspired countless other families to open their hearts and homes to children in need. They visit Ukrainian cultural centers on weekends, where they teach other refugee children English and help them adapt to American life. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every show, every contestant, every moment he spends in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes the most important moments in television happen when you stop trying to entertain and start trying to love. The folded piece of paper with their speech has become something of a legend in the Family Feud community. Staff members who were there that day still talk about it with reverence. New employees are told the boys' story as part of their orientation, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what the show can be at its very best. Because that's what love looks like. That's what courage sounds like. And that's what happens when two Ukrainian boys teach a television studio full of adults what it really means to call someone family. The game that was interrupted that day was never finished, but everyone agreed that what happened instead was far more valuable than any prize money could ever be.